Anyone interested to comment, share, experience, reflect?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Chumpon about you characterized, I think earlier in your presentation you were reflecting on perhaps the 1990s when you said that the public was somewhat indifferent to what you and your collaborators were doing. Perhaps the public was not so easily engaged at that time. I just wanted to ask you how, in your feeling, how that's changed and if it's changed. Because, I mean, here we are in the central commercial intersection of a very large city. I mean, this, you know, the kind of formal and institutional framing of Asiatopia has changed very considerably over that period. I wonder if you could reflect on how engaged or engageable the public is.
Yeah, well, thank you, David, for putting that in my mouth. My recognitions in the society has two parts in Thailand. One is an activist, AIDS activist, a human rights activist, democracy, whatever we can call it. I've done them all, and you know, and also I'm an artist. And so we see the community in two different kind of community. The community like us, this is a community, but we don't live in the same area, and also the community that they are in one area. For example, in the village that I lived in, it consists of, like, you know, quite a few families, that's all. Everybody knows everybody, and they do different things. And also the communities of people who practice certain labor. Yeah. For instance, like sex workers, they are a community of sex workers, you know, because they work in the same things. They are communities of gay, lesbian, you know, because they consist of the same recognition, the same problem. They face some of common things. But what I have seen is that all of these type of the communities, they are looking for the recognition. They are facing the state's dominations of who they are and what they are to be. And they have been bombarding with numbers of researchers coming from different universities in Thailand, outside Thailand. They're coming to conduct research on if they want to find about how do people behave in their sexual lives, you know, in order to produce or to find how many contraceptives they're going to distribute in these communities. So they have to do the research, which, you know, for me it's funny, you know, and it's very sad, you know, because if you want to give people the condoms, you just go and give them. You don't make a research, right? But they have to do it in order to come up with numbers. And all this research, for on one hand, it's a state wants to recognize that what people need. On the other hand, the people are not allowed to tell directly to the state of what the people need. So they need somebody in between. You know, that's a researcher. You know, they go to make all this number, and then 3 years later they have the condoms. All right? And this is how, if you are a community, if you are the people in the community, what would you do? You know, what would go on in your mind? In my village, there's a village announcement system 2 times a day. One at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the other one at 6 o'clock in the evening. People who come to stay in my house know that. Every day, okay, there will be broadcasting the order from the government. Okay, today there will be doctors come. Those look like a very good service. The doctor will come to your village, you know, and then you come, you know, have a doctor check up your, you know, on your teeth, on your whatever. And then the next day there will be the bank comes, the farmers bank will come and you know and take all your monies, you know, to put in the bank. And later on there will be, you know, every day there will be something, and then I ask, you know, how people are going to work. You know, when you have this order to go to the meeting every day, and only 300 people in the village, you know, how much time they have for themselves. You know, the community are not allowed, the individual, the people are not allowed to have their own time. Yeah. Is it your answer? Yeah.
The theory has been quite thick and very interesting. But I'm wondering if we go back to the word theory as another looking, a second looking in a sense. And if you could talk about the performance of theory. And something which seemed to link all the presentations was the way that it's like the cow analogy, that entering into the private space, public space, / it's not private, it's not completely public, it's not completely private. This kind of the way that performance smudges into daily life, which makes it so difficult to analyze, because it constantly opens up into that daily life. And so you look for the boundary and you can't find it if you look close enough. If you look from a distance, then it looks, oh yes, that's performance art. It looks very, but then you begin to analyze the performance and you realize that there were so many elements drawn from just everyday behaviors in that performance. So what is it actually? What is the performance? And is it simply a sort of concentration of something which was there a long time before? Okay, so I'm asking the same thing about theory. And your theorization and your performance of theorization. Is it rhizomically linked to daily life in some way? What you were doing today, and this performance of presenting. Yes, I'll leave it there.
Oh, good heavens. I certainly perform theory. I guess I can't get out of this question. Now, all right, so you did mention the rhizome, so we'll get into Deleuze. And the first thing that I really have to cite, by way of a footnote, are lines of light. A deterritorialized line of light, rather than the dichotomy between rhizomes and trees and arboreal formations. Because lines of light was most conscious in the way I theorized or tried to theorize this morning, the idea of that the closeness, the sealedness of, in what we primitively call futility, that performance, when a lot of art seems to not be able to move political events. And I used an imperfect word, futile. I could have used inutile, but as a matter of fact, I actually turned it around and I tried to say that it could be a positive term. And it can be a positive term by pushing futility and inutility as a doggedness after lines of flight. There can be lines of flight. There can be ways of moving through the territorialized areas and move into areas of hopefulness. And to me, being moved to tears is an area of hopefulness, which we can hardly remove from the everyday, from your tear ducts, from the way I responded to 3 posters about the Hezbollah. I mean, for heaven's sakes, it's a kind of, and I'm not using a humanistic measure here at all, and I'd actually like to say that the important thing is to simply junk humanism and to look at the post-human and to look at the idea of figuring out something that goes beyond the, or goes outside. This is the reason I'm big on outside or just outside or immediately outside. Very near, but not intra, because I'm very suspicious of very intra-art things. So, I don't know if I'm making sense, but I'm trying to put together the idea that you can find ways of finding spaces of hope by basically jettisoning humanist vocabulary. And that's what I tried to do this morning.
I will not be on a Deleuzean trajectory.
He started it.
Yeah, no, I'm not blaming you.
It's your fault.
Is this performance of theory connected to my everyday life? Well, yes. I mean, it is labour. And it absolutely is. In case you don't know, I have a job in a university, and sometimes I publish this stuff. You know, they pay me to do this. So, I mean, it is you're welcome to my life. It's absolutely part of my everyday life. Having said that, a lot of what I'm trying to do, I actually studied theory, right? My background is very theoretical. When I was at university, I didn't know what an artist looked like. I studied in a department which Ray knows very well, had nothing to do with art schools. So. But the longer I've spent in Southeast Asia, and I've been living in the region since, on and off really, but since about 2004, obviously, you know, the needs for theory are different in different places, and I found when I moved to Bangkok, for example, that nobody had any need for a critical theorist. What they did need was, you know, advocacy and activism. They needed organisers, they needed writers, they needed critics. They still need critics. They needed curating. Curating wasn't really being done very much, and that was something that people kind of would ask me to try to do, so I tried to do it. Theorising has ever since been something that I've kind of put to the side, and once I moved into a university job, even more so actually, for different reasons. Now it's because I don't want theories that are imported through my brain into this part of the world to simply be kind of unleashed as though they were native to the field I was looking at. I'm looking at art and culture and art histories and cultural histories in places that, you know, a great deal of similarly reflexive thinking has happened, but not through the filters and the vocabularies of those things that I bring to the field. And it took me a while to sort of figure this out. Of course, there is theory lurking in the wings throughout the presentation that I've just given. You know, I mean, a lot of anthropological work, certainly some, you know, post-structuralist French critical theory, someone like Bourdieu, I mean, this is all there in the wings, but actually, the longer I've been in Southeast Asia, the more I've started to feel that what is needed is history. And so I've become a kind of accidental art historian a little bit. And I still loathe art history, but sometimes I perform it. And I think what you saw there was probably more a performance of a kind of amateur art history than it was theory.
What's the word theory come from?
Well, it comes from Greek seeing, and it's a kind of a seeing of seeing, a double seeing, that you step back and look at the actual act, in a sense,
Yeah, it's like
from
you look
another
at the
perspective.
video twice.
Yeah, and there was, sorry?
It's like you look at the video twice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Or watching yourself watching the video.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't have much of that theory. I'm more interested at how to make things done, and maybe theory come into that. So I strategize. I try to think of who works for this particular what you call ideas as an organizer. Same as when I try to do my work, I also think of what would work for the idea that I have. And if when I really do it and then I don't want that stuff that I prepare, what I'm going to do with them. So all these are the strategies that I have to get ready to be confronted with. And I don't know if those words or if those practice are so-called the theory. I learned from the people who have the cow parking in front of my house, and try to the measuring the length of the ropes that tie the cow, so the cow not go so much further into my yard. And also in that kind of thinking, in the kind of looking at the space between the trees to the gates to my house. The farmers who taking the cows, they know exactly how much they're gonna give the cow freedom to roam around and eating the grasses. So it's this is probably part of the recognition of their of their intervention. Okay. They know exactly how much they can do, and how much not to interfere into the other people's privacy. On the other hand, the villager said not to make me angry. Yeah, that's very simple. But when you are academic people, you try to find new words for it. So I think this is how we recognize, and I know that the Video Cruz is preparing something, and he asked me in the toilet that if he can do some sort of intervention. I said, yeah, it's not entertaining. So it's very much into the context, right? So we are not. I think in terms of theorize, the performativities of our action is not only just about what you do. You know, it's not things that are happening on the stage. It's the whole surrounding. It's the whole conditions. It's the whole. It's the subject. It's the context that you choose to perform at that particular time, at that particular place, and also how much artists are aware of the length of the ropes.
Ramaini, final word.
Thank you. I'm awake now. But I hope it's not going to be considered entertaining. Well, I'm a practitioner. I'm not a theorist, so I stand here on this side, close to Chumpon. Actually, I want to respond to what Chumpon has talked about and explained. And he mentioned something that he also once went to Yogyakarta, where I'm based. And yes, we did this festival in a village. And there was some situation where maybe Chumpon also still remember it. What I want to add is, there's something, this is just for your information basically, something that has to do with the community activity in Jogja and its surroundings, Five Mountains community, for example, is actually slightly different from what Chumpon has seen or experienced here. Actually, the kind of work with the community or activism, but also included art activities, performance activities, traditional as well as contemporary, has been accepted by the people in this particular community. So this is also becoming a kind of model of this experimental kind of, community activity. But it's been going on for maybe more than 2 decades, even maybe 3 decades. So this is quite different from the rest of the community all over Indonesia, because it's really independent. We never have a problem with the government because we never ask anything from them. And we never have any problem with NGO because we never ask anything from NGO. So it's really, really independent. And then because of that, we have a kind of situation where we have some kind of freedom, and so do people. And this is really exciting, but of course we have to take care, nurture all the time. We cannot just do it for 1 week or 1 month and then bye-bye. No, of course not, right? So this is something maybe will be interesting in the future, not only in Indonesia, but maybe in Southeast Asia. And in my case also, I try to implement this kind of approach up in Tibet Plateau for the last 6 years. But I'm not going to tell you now because I'm supposed to talk about that another day, right? Yeah. Okay. So I think this will be something interesting to discuss. And if you have also your experience with the community, I mean, I know my friends from the Philippines, they have been doing also some things with the community, and maybe we can share also with us. So anyway, I'm quite hopeful with this kind of movement that I have experienced myself back with my community. There's actually this so-called Five Mountains community, for example, in Central Java, but also the urban folk community in Yogyakarta, which is basically really independent. So we can do anything we want, and they are also accepting performance art as their kind of language. So it's not only artists, we who perform, they also performing. So the kind of, for example, protest movement on the street, These people are just performing like me, like all my artist friends, which is, of course, fantastic. We are very happy about it. Okay, continue next day.
So I think with this we conclude this first sessions. There is a lot in between of what has been said. Oops, here it is a final request. Now everybody wants to talk, it's time to eat. Okay, please. I cannot refuse that.
Just thank you. I just want to ask a short question for Champon about the situation here in Thailand. Like in Indonesia, we have the group of fundamentalist Muslim as a part of public outside of the state. So they also try to control, you know, the name of them is FBI, not FBI, Forum Pembela Islam. So they always control our exhibition and performance. And the other question to David about the new art movement in 1975, and also with Mulyono, the title of the works when he's in the podium, KUD, Koperasi Unit Desa, you know, about the village. But do you know about the content from the difference between the concept of Mulyono and also the new art movement? Because they have the concept of dialogue is transformative, that Mulyono as a mediator from the village people and the artwork. And also with Marianne about the situation like in Borneo in 1980s, you know, like when people want to show about, to demonstrate their black magic, they have to be in the front of the public area, like in the market. So when our people, our friend, when they want to make performance art, they attacked by the group of the black magic people, because they think they want to show their power of black magic. This is in Banjarmasin in 1980s. Kalimantan, yeah. That's just the question. Thank you.
Do you want me to start? Sure. Yeah, I probably should have underscored that I'm absolutely not an expert on Indonesian late modern and contemporary art. My knowledge of the 70s is more or less filtered through what has been published in English on that subject. In fact, what the point I was making about Mulyono, and of course there is a far more complicated relationship to be articulated there between Mulyono and others of that period. Typically you'll see in big picture art histories, you'll see FX, early FX performances and so on. So this connection between the Indonesian New Art movement and what followed, I think is already to some extent a fairly well-known narrative outside of Indonesia. Mulyono's the information about Mulyono's work has started to trickle out into an international circulation much later, actually. And this, of course, also comes down to the very potent currency of figures that were involved in certain of these groups. We've already talked about Apinan today, and Jim Supangat would be another obvious name to flag here. Actually the decision to move towards the village, as I sort of described it, was also a deliberate decision to move away from those networks of patronage and promotion, right? So I don't take anything away from that. I think that's a very important dimension of what that turning was. No, I don't know the details of the even of the images really that I've shown. I showed them more to make a kind of passing point about the great diversity of aesthetic expressions of localism in different places at that time. The only thing I would add about Mulyono in this context is that the account that I was drawing on of his work in East Java was actually a kind of ethnographic one. It was compiled in, I think, a thesis of some kind, which was art historical in its framing, but actually it was basically the results of a long interview with the artist and describing the artist's aversion and frustrations with various other positions in late modernism. So I'm absolutely not an expert.
I'd like to address that because it's very important to me, as a matter of fact, even if I'm really not familiar with the Kalimantan situation in the 1990s. But the word black magic actually rings a lot of bells with me. And this is my moment of the shameless plug. May I? All right. I've just written a book which will not be published for reasons that I'll tell you shortly. It's to do with the killings in the 1970s. It started in 1969 in Mindanao. Where a lot of Christian settlers in Mindanao conducted what effectively was ethnocide on Muslim communities. This was, for the Filipinos here, this was the Ilaga days. And I believe I could be the first one with recorded admissions of killing everybody in a village together with pigs, dogs, not pigs, because these were Muslim communities, chickens, babies, and eating them, and cannibalism. So Christians cannibalizing Muslim bodies. This is the reason why I'm very big on embodiments, because that was a particularly gruesome and horrific sets of acts that happened in the 1970s in Mindanao. Now, the reason I make mention of this is that the perpetrators believed that they could not be killed because they had oils and magics that allowed them to survive being shot and being hacked. And this book, which is ready, was brought up with MILF, the head of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, which the head of it, Chairman Murad, said that it perhaps will cause a great deal more conflict because these are Christians admitting to ethnocide. Now, I don't know when the book will be published, but I am announcing that it exists. It's been circulating amongst leaders of the Philippines. But I mention it in this context because I'd like to link the work of theory with this work, which is quite physical. The work of theory has allowed me to enter a world where the realities exist together, and they're all different realities. You have people who believe that by eating Muslim bodies, that it allows for the perpetration of certain kinds of power. And Muslims wishing to be silent about it, which leads me to the need for theorizing silences. At that time, during the decades in between, and by the chair of the Moro Islamic Liberation Front right now, who does not want to actually release the book because of reprisals of Muslims who will obviously kill the people in my book. Now, I also mention this as a response to the utterance of the words community and village in this room. And I would dearly love to make an appeal for more complexity with the use of these words, because communities and villages are such fraught places that if you have David here, and I appreciate this, making a call for parsing conflated histories. The call for parsing villages and communities is actually even greater. So thank you.
I think think these are very important concluding words. Community are not uniform, region are not uniform, global is not uniform, etc. We say it, but it's very difficult to somehow break out of this way of thinking, of deconstructing all our ideas.